So last time we started talking about UCAT because it's incredibly important for all of you in the sense that it's the sort of main gateway that you have to get through in order to secure yourself an interview. Once you get to interview, that is what will decide whether you get an offer or not. But even getting an interview depends to some extent on your GCSEs, but it depends probably more than anything else at most universities on how well you do in UCAT. And it's difficult to do well. So we saw that with verbal reasoning last time, that although the questions in themselves were not fantastically difficult, there was a huge time issue in that you had to be able to read very fast to get it all done in the time. And that's going to be, to an extent, an issue with what we're doing today as well. So we're looking at the second section, which they call decision making. And what that means is that they give you logical puzzles of various kinds. And there are 6 different kinds of puzzle, but those will be the only kinds of puzzle you get. So you can be prepared for each puzzle format, and by the time you go into the exam, know how you're going to approach trying to get them done quickly and accurately. So those are the 6 types, and we'll go through each of them in turn. The important information on that slide, though, is that you can see again it's going to be a time issue, because you have to do 35 questions in 37 minutes. So again, it's around a minute per question, and some of those questions have like 5 parts. So it's about being really quick and efficient at each type. So let's look at the first one, which they call logical puzzles. So the idea is that they're going to provide you with some information. Usually it's a paragraph of text, but it could be a table with information in it, or a diagram or something like that. They put in a mixture of these things. And then they'll give you 4 statements at the bottom, only one of which is definitely true based on the information you've been given. And you've got to find the one that's definitely true. The other ones, some of them will definitely not be true, but more commonly, there just isn't enough information to be sure. So it's a case of looking at the information you're given, only considering that. Sometimes you'll know some extra things, or you might disagree with the information you're given, but you have to ignore all of that. Your answer has to be purely based on the information that you're given in the question. Okay, and you've got to find the one that you think is definitely true. Okay, so let's have a look at an example of that. You can see that you're likely to need paper and pencil for this in the actual exam. So I should get something out to scribble on, because for most of these kind of problems, you probably can't do it all in your head. So I should get something to scribble on to work these out. In the actual thing, they give you a little booklet of like whiteboard sheets and a pen, so you can do exactly the same thing then. Okay, so when I do questions like this, I just try and do a little diagram kind of thing to organize my thoughts, and I think that's the most efficient way for most people. And as I say, you can do that in the actual exam because they give you sheets that you can write on. But it's got to be quick, so it has to be something very concise, not sort of great longhand summaries of what you know and things. Okay, so anybody want to make a suggestion which one they think is the one that's definitely true? Someone must have an afterthought. Nope. Okay, well, let's have a look then. So what I'll do is show you the way I worked it out, which is not necessarily the most efficient way, it's just the way I did it. Usually once you get to the answer, if you sit and think about it for a minute, you discover that you could probably have found a more efficient way of getting there, but that's just the way it is. The thing to do is that you can't afford to spend a lot of time, puzzling out what's the best way to approach it. You've got to sort of look at the information, make a quick decision as to how to approach it, and then just get on with it. So this is the way I did it. I just looked at that first bit of information, which is that you've got Lisa and Dan having a daughter, Nancy, and she has a son, and a daughter, Anna. So that I just put that information on there. And just a sort of quick scribbled version of something like that, I think is just going to help you then organize your thoughts. And then you think, right, well, what's the next thing? It tells you that Polly's husband is not Ronald, but they're not even on the diagram yet. So skip that one because that's not really helpful at the moment. But then it says Lisa and Dan have 2 children, hence the other branch on there, and 4 grandchildren. So we know there must be 2 more children at the bottom, and we know the information about those from the last line, which is that Jim and Chris are Jake's sons, but Jake is not Dan and Lisa's son. So if we put that on there, we get this. So you've got Jim and Chris being the grandchildren at the bottom, and then Jake is married to somebody, and the key thing is that Jake is not Dan and Lisa's son. So Jake's partner must be Dan and Lisa's daughter. And that's then actually all the information you need to get the right answer, because you've got a daughter on the left-hand side, whoever she is, and then you've got Nancy, who's a daughter on the right-hand side. So the right answer is C, because you must have 2 daughters. And that's as far as you need to go. You don't need to then fill in the remaining names. I mean, it's easy to do that, but you don't need to, and there's no point wasting time doing it. So you can fill it in like that, and that completes the thing. But actually, in the exam, it wouldn't be worth doing that because you'd already have figured out that C was the right answer. So not tremendously difficult, but you've got to do that in 1 minute, and that's what makes it challenging. So let's have a go at another one, but this time we will do it against the clock just to give you a feeling for what it's like trying to do it fast. Having said that, this one I think is easier, so hopefully you might have a reasonable chance of getting through most of it. Okay, so off you go. Okay, so that's time up. So anybody managed to get an answer? Anybody managed to get an answer in the time? Yeah, what did you get? C, anybody agree, disagree? You agree? Yeah, so C is the right answer, so well done if you got that. So let's have a look at how you approach that. Now, this is an example of a question which is actually very easy, but it's kind of dressed up in a way that makes it look more complicated than it is. And that's the trick they commonly employ, is just to sort of give you spurious information that doesn't actually help you solve the problem, but just kind of dresses it up and makes it look more difficult. So the key thing here is that they give you the numbers of the rooms in the diagram, and a couple of the possible answers would depend on knowing the numbers of the rooms that people were in. But you can see in the actual information you're given, it doesn't involve the numbers at all. It's all about the sort of geometric relationships between, you know, where people are relative to one another across the rectangle. So the room numbers are a red herring. That's the key thing. And once you realize that, then you don't spend time trying to figure out, you know, what room Meg is in or whatever it is. So this is how I did it. I just said, right, well, I'm just going to put Meg anywhere. So I chose to put a top left, but you could have chosen anywhere. And then you just fill in the rest of the information that it gives you, which is that Adam is diagonally opposite. So that's Meg and Adam there. And then it tells you that Meg's room is closer to Tessa's than Polly's. So you get that. And just based on that, you can see that Tessa is closer to Meg. And so you say, right, that's the right answer, and C was therefore correct. And you're probably left feeling, yeah, but what if I chose the wrong corner? But you can see from the sort of symmetry of that you would come out with the same answer regardless of where you put Meg, that she and Tessa would be on one of those short sides, and therefore that they're the closest together. So C was the right answer. But it would be very easy to get bogged down trying to worry about the numbers, and that's the trick with questions like this. Okay. So that's the first type of problem. And they all have that same kind of format, but they're going to vary a lot in the detail. So the only way you're going to be able to go in confidently is to have just done loads of them, so that all the different kinds of tricks you'll have come across. So here's the second type now then, the syllogisms as they call them. So what they do here is they give you two or more short statements, and what you have to do is accept those as being true. Doesn't matter if you disagree with them, you have to accept those as being true, and you mustn't take account of any other knowledge you may have. So just based purely on those premises that they will give you 5 statements, and for each one you just have to decide, is it definitely true just based on the premises they've given you, or is it not true, or is there just not enough information to be really sure? Okay, so let's have a look at an example. Again, you can see very short bit of information at the top, and then you've got to do all 5 of those, and you would have to do all of that in a minute. Okay, so see what you make of that one. Okay, so let's have a look through those then. So first one then, no girl studies only French. Is that definitely true, or do we not know? Vote for definitely true. Anybody disagree? Yeah, no, that one is right because it tells you that all students must study at least two. So obviously only French isn't an option. So that's a definite yes. All of the boys study 2 foreign languages. What do you think for that one? Yeah, that's a yes again, because it tells you that no boy studies 3, and we've already established that you can't study just one, so the only possibility is 2. So that's a yes. More girls than boys study foreign languages. You can't tell, can you? There's no information about how many boys versus girls there are, never mind how many study how many foreign languages. So there's just no information about numbers, so that's a no. More girls than boys study 3 foreign languages. Yeah, that's a no. That was the one that they were kind of trying to trick you with, I think, because it says in that second sentence, no boy studies all 3 foreign languages. If you were having, if this was a conversation, you'd probably think that they were implying, because they say no boy does, that some girls do. But remember, implied is no good in this. It has to be stated definitely, otherwise you can't assume it to be true. So just because it doesn't say that some girls do, you can't assume anything about that. So you've got no information about how many girls study 3. So therefore, the answer is no, you can't tell. And the last one, at least one boy and at least one girl study the same pair of languages. No, again, because it's possible that, for example, all the boys study French and German and all the girls study German and Spanish. So there would be no examples of that in that case. So not enough information. Okay, so none of them are terribly difficult, just that potential slight trap on the fourth one. But again, it's just about being efficient and being able to do it fast. So let's try another one. And again, this time we'll try and get it done in a minute then. So if you go. Okay, so that's time up. How many people managed to get all 5 done? Okay, that's good. If you didn't, don't worry about it. You've got plenty of time. This one, I think you'll agree, was quite a lot easier than the first one. And that's what you're going to find always in these things, that they're a mixture of hard and easy questions. And they do that deliberately to see if you've got that trick of sort of managing your time properly, that if you came to a really difficult question, the sensible thing would be to say, right, I can't spend a lot of time doing this, so I'm going to leave it till the end and make sure I get the marks in for the quick and easy ones, which hopefully this one is. So let's just go through it quickly then. So the first one, if rice is edible, it must have been boiled. That's a yes, because it says that rice is inedible unless it's been boiled. Second one, if rice has been boiled, it must be edible. Well, that's a no, because it tells you that it needs salt as well. Third one says edible rice must have been boiled and salted. Well, yeah, that's what it basically says. That just repeats the premises, so that's a yes. If rice has been salted, it must be edible. Well, no, because it may not have been boiled. So that's a no. And if rice has been boiled, it must have been salted. Well, that's obviously nonsense because they're two separate operations. So that's a no. So that was really quite straightforward. And once you're up to speed, that would probably be a 30-second question, and that would give you that little bit of extra time that you're going to need for some of the more difficult questions. So that's the main thing with this section of the test, that it's not usually about really difficult questions. It's about manageable questions, but you have to get your speed up. Okay, so the third section is actually quite similar to the previous one, but now instead of just being given a couple of premises, you're given a more extensive bit of information, which could be in the form of text, or it might be a diagram or a graph or something like that. But it's the same format then, that they give you 5 statements, and for each one you have to decide whether it must be true based on the information that you're given. Okay, so here's your first example. Okay, let's start having a look at those then. So you've got all this information at the top. As with the verbal reasoning, you can see that there is a big advantage in being able to read fast. So, as we mentioned before, one thing that you can be doing now is trying to increase your reading speed. By, for example, we mentioned this trick of suppressing your inner vocalization so that you're kind of reading it entirely in your head rather than translating it into speech, sort of silent speech, because that really slows you down. So it's worth putting some effort into increasing your reading speed for all these things. So first one then, history influences geography. Is that a definite yes or not? No, because the whole paragraph is about how geography influences history. And you might think, yeah, but it's obvious that history influences geography. The landscape that you see around you depends on the history of what's gone on, in that place over time. But that isn't what it talks about in the paragraph, so you can't tell based on that. So that's no. Okay, second one. Geographical patterns deeply impact human life. Yeah, that's a yes. Okay, that's what the whole paragraph is about. So lots of examples of that. But for example, many of the earliest civilizations sprang up along river systems. So civilization depended on the geography, on where the rivers were. So that's a yes. Rivers provide a natural defense against enemies and invaders. Now, again, you might think, yeah, that's true, but it doesn't say anything about defense in that paragraph, so that's a no. Average income levels in landlocked regions are possibly lower than those with coastal access. Now, the key word in this one is possibly. Okay, so when they introduce that sort of language of possibly, maybe, could be, what that's saying is that it doesn't have to say that this is definitively true, but it just has to fit in with what it does say. Okay, so you've got to read these things carefully. So you're not expecting the paragraph to say definitively that people who live on the coast have bigger incomes, but you're expecting it to say something that sort of fits in with that. So what's the answer? Is that a yes or a... Yeah, that's a yes, because it says that the accessibility of a region, especially by sea, so that's coastal access, triggers economic and social development. And if there's economic and social development, then it's at least possible and probably likely that people will have bigger incomes than if there hasn't been economic and social development. So the possibly is in there because it doesn't definitively say that, but it's very definitely a reasonable interpretation. So that's a yes. And the last one, again, you can see has that language of possibly, because it says financial success of some countries may be attributed. So not necessarily, but it could be attributed to vast iron ore and gold deposits. So what do we think about that one? Yeah, that's a yes again, because last sentence says economic success of resource-rich regions. Okay, so regions that are rich in resources, and those resources could be iron ore and gold. They might not be, but they could be iron ore and gold, and therefore that could be the key to their economic success. So again, that's a yes. So first three were relatively straightforward because you just had to find the information in the text, but those last two, you can see you have to just think that little bit harder about and just make sure you notice those possibly things in the question. Okay, so same pattern as before. Let's try one against the clock. So you've got 1 minute to do this next one. Here you go. Okay, so time's up. So how many people managed to get all of those done? Okay, so that's really good if you did. Say if you didn't, don't worry about it yet, but make a note that you're going to have to be getting quicker at this. Okay, so let's have a look at the answers to those. So first one, both soil sterilization and inoculation enhance plant growth. So the key obviously is that you've got to make sure you're looking at the right bit of the table. So just double check you're looking at the growth data, not the survival data here. So what do we think about that one? Yes. Okay, so if you look in the growth columns, then if you introduce soil sterilization, it increases the growth, and then if you introduce inoculation, it increases it again. It's quite important, I think, because you've obviously got two growth columns, and you do need to check that the same is true in both columns. Because obviously if it happened in one but not in the other, then you couldn't say that that was definitely true. But since it's true in both, then that's a yes. Okay, maximum growth was recorded in the last 6 months of the experiment. What do you think about that one? Okay, lots of people shaking their heads. Anybody voting for yes? Well, that was actually a yes, that one, because if you look at the first row, for example, the growth after 1 year was 30 centimeters. And then after 1.5 years, it had gone up to 100 centimeters. So it increased by 70 in that last 6 months, which is much more than happened in the first year. And you get the same pattern in each of the rows. So the maximum growth was happening in that second period, which was the last 6 months of the experiment. So lots of people sort of got that one wrong. So anybody got any thoughts as to what the problem was with that one? Yeah. So why would that say it's not during the last 6 months? Oh, I see what you mean. But yeah, but it was what growth was recorded rather than what could potentially be achieved. So again, it's making sure you focus on just the information you're given. Because obviously you're right that in real life it probably keep on growing, but you've got no information about that. So yeah, that's an interesting one. But yeah, that one is a yes, because you can see that much more growth in the second period than in the first one. Okay, third one then, survival rate is highest when they're grown in sterilized soil and are inoculated. What do we think for that one? That's a no, because you can see, for example, if you look at, make sure you're looking at survival. So looking at that first column, you can see that sterilization is good because that increases survival hugely, but then it actually goes down when you introduce inoculation as well. So that isn't supported. Maximum growth was recorded for seedlings that were grown in sterilized soil but were not inoculated. That's no again. So again, looking at the growth ones, you can see that you went from 30 to 40 when you introduced sterilization, but then it increased further when you introduced inoculation. So that statement is clearly not true because the inoculation gave a better growth result. So that's a no. Now this last one, I just think is a really badly worded question. So if you looked at that and thought, what's that meant to mean, then that's kind of what I thought initially as well. These questions that we looked at today, I should say, are all from the official UCAT preparation website. So the fact that you get sort of rogue questions sometimes, unfortunately, is something you need to be aware of. So I don't think it's totally clear what that question means, but I think what it means is that some of these seedlings grown in non-sterilized soil died more than a year after they were transplanted, which isn't exactly what it says, but it's sort of saying some of them died after at least a year following their transplantation. And that you can see is true, because if you look at the first row, for example, 28% had survived after a year, but that went down to 25% after 1.5 years. So some of them had died more than a year after they were transplanted. But if you didn't get that one, I think you can absolutely forgive yourself because it's really badly worded. It doesn't happen very often, and I don't think they do it deliberately. They're just not very competent. But you know, that's what you have to live with. But as I say, it is a minority. Generally, the questions are manageable. Okay, so let's look at one more of these interpreting information ones. Won't do this one against the clock, but this one I think is significantly more difficult. One thing that you'll notice about it is that you've got percentages to calculate. So potentially if your mental maths is fantastic, you might be able to do it in your head, but for most people, that's going to mean using a calculator. So in the test, there is a calculator available, is the good news. But the bad news is that you can't use your own calculator. So there is an on-screen calculator that you have to use, on a sort of touch screen thing. And it's really annoying because it's the kind of calculator that was the state of the art 25 years ago. And it's very kind of clunky. So when you get on to doing your actual practice, an important component of that practice is actually getting used to the calculator, because as with everything else, you've got to be quick with it. So, for at least one of those, you probably might want to use a calculator to see if it's true. Okay, but see what you make of it all anyway. Okay, so this one, I think you can see, is quite a lot more involved than the first two examples of this that we've looked at. And you can kind of tell that almost before you've really got stuck into it, just by looking at the kinds of statement that you've got to find the answers to. So I think if I were doing this in the test, I would be inclined to leave this one to the end, because what you can do when you're doing the test is, if you come to a question that you don't like the look of, you can just mark it as not done yet, and then skip quickly on to the next one, and then when you've hopefully got time left at the end, come back to the difficult ones. Because with this one, you should be able to get all of those correct, but if it's taken you 3 minutes instead of 1 minute, that's not a sensible strategy. So once you've done enough practice, you'll hopefully develop that instinct that sort of says, right, this is one that I ought to skip because it's going to take too long. to sort out. So let's have a look through anyway. So the first one says 70% of the guests consumed the carrot squares, and nearly 89% of those fell ill. So that's easy to check from the numbers, but it's going to take you a bit of time because you've got to do the calculation. So if you look at the carrot square line at the bottom there, you can see 35 people ate them out of the 50 total. So that's 70% that you can do in your head. But nearly 89% fell ill, so that you probably can't do in your head. So it's 31 out of 35, and so that would be a calculator job to check that that was true, I suspect. But it is true because it comes out at 88.6%. So that one is a yes. Okay, second one. It's most likely that the sandwiches carried the bacteria that caused the outbreak. So that's a tricky one because now you've got to decide, how do I use the data to figure out which food most likely carried the bacteria? So what's the answer? What should you look at in order to answer that question? Yeah. That's interesting. The problem with all of the data about the people who did eat something is that most people ate more than one thing. So all of those data in the left-hand part of the table are difficult to interpret because, 20 people ate onion soup and all 20 of them became ill. So you might think, well, that surely means that there's a high risk that the onion soup carried the bacteria. But the trouble is that those people ate lots of other stuff as well. So those data are murky. So actually, the cleanest data you've got are from the right-hand part of the table, where it tells you the total number of people who didn't eat the food, and then out of those people who didn't eat it, how many of them became ill anyway. And when you look at those, you can see there's a clear sort of outlier. So for onion soup, for example, 30 people didn't eat it, and 12, so getting on for half of those, became ill anyway. And that's true for most of the foods, that around half or more of the people who didn't eat it became ill anyway. But the outlier is the sandwiches, because 14 people didn't eat them and only 2 of those didn't become ill. So that supports the idea that if you didn't eat sandwiches, you had a low risk, not a zero risk, but a low risk of getting the infection, and therefore it's most likely that the sandwiches carried it. But that's really quite difficult because you've got to decide that that's the right strategy, and then look at all of the numbers. And that's what I mean about this question being really quite involved. So that's a yes, just based on the fact that 2 out of 14 is a much lower proportion for the people who became ill, even not having eaten it, compared to any of the other foods. Okay, so third one, almost 91% of the people who attended the event suffered gastroenteritis attack. What do we think about that one? Can we tell how many people got gastroenteritis from the data? No, because all you've got is how many people got it as a function of a particular food, but because people ate more than one food, you can't work out how many people in total got gastroenteritis, and therefore you can't work that out as a percentage of 50. So that's a no. But again, you can see it's a mean question, because as soon as you see that 91%, your brain's probably saying, I ought to be calculating something. But actually that was a trick, and you were just meant to say, well, there's no point trying to calculate anything because we haven't got enough information here. Okay, risk of developing gastroenteritis was highest amongst the people who ate carrot squares. No, that one is definitely not true. So you can see that 31 out of 35 carrot square eaters became ill, but for example, all of the onion soup eaters became ill. So just based on the data in the table, that's not the case. And then the last one, among the guests who suffered from gastroenteritis, curried rice was consumed more than other dishes. Well, you can see that curried rice was consumed by 32 people who became ill, but sandwiches were also consumed by 32 people. So no is the answer to that one, because it was equal with the sandwiches. So those last two were actually quite easy compared to the preceding ones. And so again, it's that case that you might not want to skip the whole question, but you might want to skip like the tricky sort of risk one in the middle there, but then sort of think, oh, those last two are actually answered relatively straightforwardly. And it's just prioritizing like that, making sure that you get through as much as you possibly can in the time, because what I notice every year is, if people come to see me and sort of say, oh, I got this really disappointing UCAT score, and they always say it's because I ran out of time, because I wasn't being disciplined enough in making sure I got through the questions at a reasonable rate. And the only way you can learn to do that is by doing loads and loads of practice. Okay, so we'll look at the remaining 3 sections next week, but that's all we'll do on the